Greetings everyone, my cat just decided to lay down all over my keyboard and cuddle with me, so it's a bit hard to record. Anyways, this is episode 13 of this fanfic read-through. Enjoy! Ghost Crime, chapter 13. The plan was simple. The FBI agents had explained it to the rest of the police officers and the SWAT team that was all going to be part of the operation. Rosie felt confident that they would capture the killer this time without any civilians getting hurt. Jiro was playing the bait and they had taken precautions to hinder anyone from getting into the crossfire. Sitting in the SUV, he and Lewis were both keeping their eyes on the back street that was essentially garage ports and tall concrete walls. They could see Jiro standing in a doorway. There were snipers at both ends of the street, and a SWAT team was standing by. Luke and Prentice were both in their own cars, staking out the other end of the street. If this drags on, we might be here till the end of the night, yawned Tara. We should consider ourselves lucky that it isn't that cold. Jiro is the one deciding when to call off the stakeout, said Rossi, glancing over to a carport, where he kept imagining seeing a shadow move. Jiro was playing the role of a woman waiting to meet someone. She wore jeans and a hoodie under her leather jacket, and kept checking her watch, hair falling around her face. She paced, and although she played the part very well, her eyes were sharp, noting every little movement on the empty street. An hour had already gone by, and another hour was almost over when something changed. Rosa had just bent down to pick up the sugar to his coffee, when Tara went completely still. He looked up quickly and blinked. Jiro had been walking from one end of the street to the next, and was now standing rigid in the middle of the street, half turned away from Rosie and Lewis. Behind her stood a large man dressed in a trench coat and broad-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. A slight fluorescent glow was coming off the thin blade that lay across Jiro's throat. The killer was holding on to the hilt. White-gloved hands were holding on to the other end, clearly straining to keep the blade away from Jiro. Rosie and Lewis jumped out of the SUV, calling for the SWAT team, as they did, taking in the appearance of the man holding on to the sword blade. White hair, glowing green eyes, he stood a bit shorter than Jiro, dressed in a white and black hazmat suit with a white accent around the shoulder and collar. And Rosie realized he was a teenager, not a man, when he tilted his head, showing his face to them, the white hair and dark shadows under his eyes making him look older. "If you don't want to talk, that's fine by me, just leave them alone," growled the teenager, twisting his body along with his sword, forcing it away from Jiro's throat. Jennifer got away from the killer, taking out her gun and aiming it at him, just as Rosie and Tara got their guns out. "You're under arrest, put down the sword," and the killer whipped out the second half of the sword cane, throwing it at Agent Jiro, forcing her to duck. "Don't!" The white-haired teenager growled, letting go of the sword, closing the distance between him and the killer, striking the man in the chest with glowing green hands, in a move Rosie had only seen in the movies. The teenager didn't stop there, but went for a second strike as the man stumbled backwards. Meeting the broadside of the sword, an odd tune echoed out from the strike, making the two stumble backwards from each other, tilting their heads like the sound was hurting their ears. Rosie could hardly keep up with the boy's movement, let alone the killer. Both were moving fast, the teenager's glowing hands striking the sword more often than the man, whereas the killer kept him dancing in and out of arm's reach, swinging the deadly blade. "Now!" shouted the teenager, jumping into the air, and stayed hovering. A white line flew across the street as the killer made to jump after him, and instead he got his foot pulled out from under him. "Got him!" called a familiar voice from a dark corner. Rosie snapped his head in the direction of the voice, seeing a darkly dressed girl come out of the shadows beside one of the carports. "The hell are you doing here?" shouted Jiro at Sam Manson, who was holding a fishing rod in both hands, her eyes intent on the killer attached to the other end of the line. The white-haired teenager flew down upon the killer, gripping him around the shoulders and throwing him. Not as good as he might have wanted, the killer's sword swiping at him as he did, but good enough to buy him some time. "Step back, this is FBI business," said Rosie, his eyes catching the movement of Luke and Prentice coming from the other end of the street. "You would have been killed right now if it weren't for us," came a second familiar voice from behind Rosie and Tara. Dr. Lewis spun around, her gun pointing at Tucker Foley, a phone illuminating his face. "What the— You shouldn't be here," she said, turning back to point at the killer who had gone up and was swinging his blade at the white-haired kid again. "You got nowhere to go," growled the teenager, stepping back as the killer aimed for his head. "Let go of him." He dodged a second swipe and seemed to go translucent and jumped straight for the killer's chest. "Get out of the way," shouted Luke, from where he and Prentice had stopped and taken aim. The agent stared in surprise as the kid went into the killer's body, for a moment being one and the same, and then he was flung out the back, feet first, a hand holding onto a dark shadow pulling at it before being pulled back like a rubber band, and he was flung across the street, hitting the ground in front of Luke and Prentice, rolling to a stop. "Danny!" shouted both Sam and Tucker. The killer struck the fishing line attached to his leg as the white-haired kid got up on all fours, coughing. Lifting his head, the white-haired teenager's eyes widened in horror as the killer made a dash for Agent Gero, red eyes gleaming. "Don't shoot!" he shouted, struggling to get back on his feet. Gero's gun went off, the gunshot echoing down the street. Getting his feet under him, the teenager flew straight for the dark shadow flowing out of the killer and into the agent in front of it. His hand gripped only air as Agent Gero twisted on the spot and planted a perfect kick in the kid's stomach, sending him back towards Luke and Prentice. "JJ, what are you doing?" shouted Rosie, his gun now at the white-haired teenager, rolling to a halt between his two colleagues. Gero didn't answer him. She bent down and picked up the sword and sheath. Twisting, she slashed at air, and a green swirling wound opened up in front of her. "She's getting away!" shouted Sam. She had dropped her fishing rod and pulled out a plastic gun that was glowing green from what Rosie presumed to be lead lamps. "Got her," said Tucker. Glancing back, Rosie saw that he was holding a lipstick that was also glowing green. He fired a green ray at Agent Gero, who jumped into the green swirl, narrowly avoiding the shot. "No, you don't!" roared the white-haired teenager, flying straight for the shrinking green swirl, a hand outstretched. The swirling portal closed milliseconds before the teenager got to it, and he tumbled to the ground, rolling up to his feet, swearing loudly. "What happened?" asked Prentice, coming up to the killer's body, her gun still aimed at the white-haired kid. "I'd like to know that too," said Rosie, turning to Sam and Tucker. "What do you think you're doing here? How did you even get here without us seeing you?" "We were trying to stop you from killing an innocent man," said Sam, walking up to the white-haired teenager, who had bent over supporting himself on his knees as he breathed hard, a hand pressed against his left side. "The man was hardly innocent," said Louise, her eyes on Tucker, who crossed his arms. "He was not the killer, but the ghost overshadowing him was," came an oddly echoing growl from the white-haired boy. He straightened up and turned hard green eyes on Rosie. "And now you lost one of your agents to it." If it weren't for his training, Rosie would have twitched at the anger in the boy's eyes and shot him on sight. Instead, he rolled his shoulders, relaxing. "And who are you to talk? You were fighting him, clearly not caring if you hurt him." The eyes flashed, and Rosie heard the kid's knuckle pop. "Danny, calm the shit down," warned Sam, placing a hand on his arm. Danny closed his eyes and made a visible effort to calm down. "I'm called Phantom. Danny Phantom," he said, opening his eyes. "I'm a ghost who fights ghosts to protect ignorant people like you." "Oi, tone it down a bit with the ignorant," said Tucker, his phone in his hands again. "Well, Phantom," began Rosie, lowering his gun, "what happened to Agent Gero, and where did she go?" Then he turned to the spot where the portal had opened and closed. Luke and Prentice were both aiming their guns at him after having checked that the killer was dead. "She was overshadowed by the Ripper Ghost," he said. Prentice saw the kid's green eyes go over the body and then close before turning back to meet Rosie's. "There is no such thing as ghosts," said Rosie, not really believing herself. "What happened to our agent?" Danny's shoulders sank. She jumped into the ghost zone, an alternative reality that exists parallel to ours. He looked over at Tucker. "You didn't happen to bring the scooters?" he asked. "Yeah, we did," said Tucker, tugging off his backpack and digging out what looked like a skateboard. "Hold on, you still haven't explained what you're doing here. And where's your friend Daniel?" asked Rosie, hard eyes falling on Sam. She had taken off her own backpack and pulled out a skateboard very similar to Tucker's in that they were both made of metal and had what looked like rockets on the sides, only hers was black. "We are from the most haunted town in the world. Phantom is protecting our town and has saved our lives on many occasions. He was in town and asked us to help him stop the killer tonight, seeing as it was overshadowing humans. He needed some of the Phantom ghost hunting gear to take it down." Sam was holding her chin high, daring the agents to question her. "Danny got some hunting equipment from his parents, but because he's hurt, we left him at the station." "You see, I don't believe your explanation," said Rosie, lowering his gun completely. "But I've seen some crazy shit tonight, and I'm willing to believe you for the sake of this argument." Both Sam and Tucker had been unfolding handles to the skateboards, connecting them up. "What are you doing?" he asked curiously. "We're going into the ghost zone to get your agent back," said Phantom. His posture had changed from that of someone ready to fight to something stiller, and still moving as if in a breeze. Looking down, Rosie noted that he wasn't standing on the ground, but floated an inch above it. "And how are you going to do that?" asked Prentice. She had lowered her gun when Rossi did, but she was much more twitchy, ready to pull it back up at any minute. The Phantom scooters come with an inbuilt portal gun, explained Tucker, flicking a switch on the handle. The scooter wheezed to life, green lights underneath it turning on. It only got enough energy to open one portal, but we should be fine, he said, looking over at Sam, who started hers. Ready to go, began Phantom, but he was stopped. We are coming along with you, interrupted Rossi, holstering his gun. He was not going to leave Gero to be hunted down by a ghost and teenagers they barely knew nor trusted longer than he could throw. Phantom looked at the man for a moment. Rossi could see the thoughts going around in his mind, before he nodded. You deserve the chance to save your friend, he said, raising an eyebrow at Sam when she started to protest. You do the same. Hell, you done the same. Sam rolled her eyes and crossed her arms in front of her. I will warn you, guns have no effects on ghosts, so you can't stop pointing them at me. He glared over at Luke, who hadn't lowered his gun yet. The ghost zone is dangerous. Expect that everything will try and kill you in there. He floated over to Sam. Give me the rope, he said, waiting patiently as Sam pulled out a length of rope from her bag. Can you two go with Sam and Tucker on the scooters, he said, pointing at Prentice and Dr. Lewis. Why? Asked Prentice, walking over to Sam. Dr. Lewis stepped onto the back of Tucker's scooter, putting her hands on the shorter boy's shoulder. Oh, you'll see, said Sam, a wicked smile on her lips. You two go on ahead, said Danny, giving one end of the rope to Luke and pulling him over to Rossi. Just tie yourself together, he said, as Tucker revved the engine to the scooter. Danny tied the other end of the rope around his waist, like the agent. Tucker let go of the brakes, and Dr. Lewis gripped tight on his shoulders as they shot forward at a surprising speed. Pressing a button at the handle, something like a green laser was shot out of the front of the scooter, then hit the air meters ahead of them, swirling open to some sort of portal, the same as they had seen Gero jump through. Sam wasn't far behind, followed by Luke and Rossi running, and Danny flying straight into the green portal just as it closed. End of chapter 13.